Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you are interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. This podcast will educate and inspire with stories of entrepreneurs' journey, and we also explore their why. You will learn from successes and failures to be the best version of yourself. Today we have Rob Greenlee, who is a partner and co-founder of Podcast EZ and a podcast himself. Now, I know Rob before. I've been on a mastermind with him for some time, so I actually know, like, full disclaimer, I know Rob from before this interview. I don't think it's understating at all to say that Rob is a podcast guru and is an amazing guest. I'm so excited to have him with me today. So thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, Mark, thanks for having me on your show. It's great to talk with you as always, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of interesting topics today.
Yeah, we'll delve into it. So the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset. The first question I ask all of my guests is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
Well, I think it's evolved. For me, it's evolved over the years as I've worked in business. I have a degree from college, so I came in to the work world from that perspective of, a business, right, and that way of thinking. So, but I think as I've worked in business, what I found is that it's really a people business is what it is. I mean, it's sure there's legal aspects, there's accounting, there's kind of more mechanical functioning things that are required by the government. But at the end of the day, it's really about working with people, and it's about building relationships, building trust, building a value exchange type of situation. So I approached it in college from the perspective of marketing. So that was my focus. But what's happened over the years is, that education that I got in what marketing was has changed a lot with technology. So that's what kind of took me down this pathway of getting more involved in creating content online, was the opportunity of this concept. And I thought of it very early as the concept of content marketing, which is basically using content as a way to reach people directly. And that I saw very early on. That's why I started a radio show and I started building distribution of my show. And so that's how I started, it became a much more personal thing for me. And that's what took me down the trajectory that I'm on of working and building trust and building relationships with people. And I did that as a sales rep for a lot of large companies. I owned a restaurant for 5 years. I worked for the Florida Citrus Commission for 5 years as well. And that was all about building relationships with buyers and brands and all this kind of stuff. So that's really kind of my orientation. That's why you see in my background, there's so many job roles that I've had that have the title partnerships.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I think business and sort of life is all about building relationships and building long-standing relationships. And yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand things like marketing, that you are marketing to a person. And so that is the critical piece to business. So I think it's interesting that you flag that right at the start. We're going to talk about, a little bit touched on your marketing and the early internet and stuff, and some of the sales roles and some of the roles that you've done with relationships and building relationships with people. But one of another question that I'm asking a lot of people at the start is, thinking about your upbringing, is there one thing about that reflects upon who you are as a person today?
Well, my upbringing was, I'm an only child for one thing. So I don't have any siblings, though I wound up having 2 children myself. So I got exposed to sibling dynamics with my own kids. But yeah, I think growing up an only child definitely painted me in a certain kind of mold. And that kind of developed over time into being a little bit more kind of, I guess, more thinking about myself as a younger person, not really communicating with others very much when I was younger. I got involved in athletics and was physically expressive in my life, but my younger Rob was not exactly someone that you would think would be on a microphone right now. So it was, my expression back then when I was younger was really more physical than it was talking or anything like that. And I had a little bit of a speech impediment after about the age of 7, where I basically lost confidence in my ability to really talk and to communicate. So it was just one of those, I don't know what happened, but it just, I lost kind of, confidence in my ability to speak. So I really focused on expressing myself physically in sports, played competitive basketball for 13 years and was very successful at playing basketball and sports, and was a high jumper, cross country runner, all those kinds of things too. So I was very active physically. But then as I got into college, I went to college and I played competitive college basketball as well. And I found myself moving more towards academics, and then really started pulling back on the athletics stuff as I kind of my last 2 years of college. So I played on varsity basketball in college and things like that. But the last year, I basically pulled out of it so I could focus on academics. So because I found it too difficult to play competitive sports and be successful in the classroom and get my degree and all that kind of stuff. So it was, some people can pull it off, but it's not always an easy path, even for those folks. And oftentimes what happens is that those athletes compromise their academics because they're more passionate about their athletics, and that puts them in a difficult position when they get done with athletics. So that was the decision that I had to make back in those days. So it really shaped me on that side. And then the younger Rob, when I was getting involved in sports, I had very strong kind of leaders in my life when I was growing up, and they were my coaches. My father was important to me as well, and he was always there, and my mother and all that stuff too. But I would say that the strong kind of guidance that I got from the junior high school and college coaches that I had, really kind of working with me, helping me build my confidence, build my skills, build my ability, build my discipline, all that stuff really had an impact on the trajectory of my career, and really building that confidence that then could be, I guess over time evolved into success as an adult more and more, just having that background and realizing that when somebody criticizes you and really kind of puts you in your place, that maybe that person is actually doing that because they care about you, but they also are doing it because they want to succeed and they want to be successful as well. And they want you to be a part of that, right? So that's kind of how I got kind of pulled into this teamwork activity that had a huge impact on the development of my future path in business. So of being able to work with others.
Were you competitive?
Yeah, I mean, in order to achieve the amount of success that I had as a basketball player with the teams that I was on, I had to be very competitive. And that was a trait that I had developed because of the coaches that I had that basically instilled that competitive spirit plus, but I think it's, to be frank about it, I think it's tempered a little bit. That competitiveness kind of evolved into being a little bit less win-lose, and it became a little bit more of trying to create win-wins. And
I just wrote that down, Rob, because I think that's a transition from sort of childhood, adolescence into adulthood, is that realization that not everything is a win or a loss or a draw. Actually, in business and in life and relationships, you can often create win-win solutions which work for both parties, which I think is incredibly important. But I just want to talk about this, the idea of the lack of confidence. So I find it quite strange. I've seen you talk on panels, in conferences, as well as listening to a couple of your episodes on your podcast as well. And you always strike me as being someone that's self-assured. You know who you are, you know what you can do, what you do well. This exploration for confidence through your adolescence, not that you ever crack it, but what apart, well, like you were talking about coaches that impacted you, were they that gave you that confidence to work out who you are and what that means to you?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe, and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
I think it was a combination of just growing up and becoming more mature, I think is a big part of it too. I think when you're an adolescent and you're younger, I think you're a little bit lacking in confidence in who you are, especially if you have a speech communication challenge early on. You're just not sure how to handle that, right? And you feel embarrassed and you feel like it's, the safest thing to do is to pull back, not jump forward. And so I think over time, I learned to cope with that limitation and minimize it as much as I can, and to move beyond it and build that confidence over time. And as I got older, it became easier to do that. And I don't know that everyone that goes through that in adolescence ever really fully develops, and because I was told in school that, I probably wasn't college material, that kind of stuff. I mean, in like not high school, but junior high school and younger and stuff like that, because of, I don't know, things that I guess people saw and one's ability to step out and take a communication type of an approach. So it's something that developed over time. And as I, saw success as a competitive basketball player, I was put into more situations where I had to maybe talk to the media, or I had to go on a radio show or something like that. It was a little bit of a progressive thing that I got a little bit better. And then, early in my career, I got pulled into maybe giving a presentation in front of the classroom, and then maybe got up in front of a city council and, talked about an issue that was important to me. And just those little things where you're getting up in front of people and start building confidence. And then at one point, I was a panelist at the Streaming Media West event. This was after I'd started my radio show, which was very bumpy. And I mean, if you go to robgreenlee.com and go to my archive area of my website, if you scroll to the very bottom of the page, you can hear one of the very first episodes that I ever did on the radio. And this was back in 1999. And you could tell it was a rough time. So when I started doing radio, which is where I started in all this path on content creation, it was really kind of like I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have a background. Sure, I had a marketing degree and I had done radio campaigns on the advertising side. So I've spent a lot of years on the advertising side in marketing as well, television, radio, all that kind of stuff. So I had kind of an exposure to it, but not getting on the microphone or in front of the camera. But over a successive period of years, I started getting pulled more and more into doing those kinds of things for other projects that I was working on too. So I became developing some level of confidence that, well, let's do it. And then I saw the internet happen in 1996, and I saw content marketing, and then I was working for the Florida Citrus Commission back then. And I built the first Florida Citrus website, and then later built the world's largest glass of orange juice for the Florida Citrus Commission. Yes. And so I was heavily involved in building websites and getting out there. And increasingly, people started noticing what I was doing and wanting to talk to me about it. And that's what got me kind of out there a little bit more. So
we could go in lots of different directions, but it's great. It's fantastic. So before we go on to the internet and the role that you were involved in early internet and the growth of the web, let's touch on the radio. So what made you want your first show? What made you feel that you needed to be in front of the microphone, that you wanted to add value that way? What started, because it was Web Talk World Radio Show that you first did. You did 1996 to 2006, 1999 to 2006.
Yep.
So what made you initially go, I need to be in front of this microphone?
Well, I had started a search engine marketing consulting practice, kind of like a side hustle, when I was working for the Florida Citrus Commission back then. So I was helping local companies in my community to get their companies listed in Yahoo and Alta Vista and some of the early search engines. So I was doing some side contracts and things that trying to help those local businesses take advantage of the internet. And so I thought, in the local radio station in the local city that I was at, this is up in the Seattle area, the internet was this up and coming thing that a lot of people didn't understand. And so I thought maybe if I went into a radio station, I started talking about the internet and the web on a radio show, that I could pick up some new clients.
Right.
So it was really not about the radio, really about doing a radio show. It was more about picking up, using this as a marketing vehicle to build trust and to pick up clients for my side hustle. So it just so happened that I brought in 3 other friends of mine that had equal passions about what was happening with the internet. And so we kind of created almost like a morning show format of talk radio, talking about what was happening culturally and technologically with the growth and development of the internet and the web. And it was a very interesting time with the internet. There was a lot of mystery and a lot of cultural changes happening with the development of that technology back then. And at the time, I had no idea what the impact of that stuff was. I mean, we talked about wireless internet access, and early on, we talked about mobile phones having wireless internet access way before there was any phones that did that.
So what was your... I'm interested because... So 1999, I was at university, and I got my first mobile phone when I was 18, when I went to university. I had a computer, but a big boxy computer,
IBM,
like the old desktop style.
Yeah, right.
But I had no vision that the internet was going to spread the way that it has and how it's impacting. I often say, when I was in the early noughties, it was like there was information technology. There were computer people that worked in companies, and they were the guys who fixed problems, software or hardware. But now those things, yes, we still have those, but the information technology is now spread in all businesses in all aspects, whether it's in marketing, social media, whether it's in AI, etc., blockchain. What at 1999 did you see? What did you see the potential for the internet and how it was going? What was the thing that you saw that you thought, this is going to be big, I need to be involved in this?
Well, it was the direct kind of interactive connection with individuals. So if I was a content creator, I create a website, right? Individuals could go directly to that and interact with that. Now, marketing up to that point was a very separated kind of a thing. You basically had to utilize radio or television, whatever, and it was a one-way communication pathway.
Yeah.
And so what I saw with the internet was this kind of potential of an interactive relationship directly with products and customers, right? So you could bypass this middle person of a radio station or a TV station to be able to reach those customers, right? So it's the whole internet was really about decentralizing control of access between this side and that side, right? It was more like putting people in charge of what they control. It was more of a lean in thing, where the world at that time was very much a lean back experience when it came to media and information, right? It was kind of like turn it on, sit back, and you get what's delivered to you. You don't really have you have a little bit of choice. You can go to channel 6, channel 8, channel 10, and same thing with the radio, right? But those programmers at those stations control what you have access to. But with the internet and the web, you had search engines. Google eventually developed and really transformed all of our lives. And it was just a fundamental shift. And at the time, I thought it was all fantastic. It was like democratization of information. People can, better communicate with each other. I had a very utopian view of what the internet could do. Right. And that's how I portrayed it in my radio show, too. It was very much like, wow, I'm so excited about this development and stuff like that. And back then it was seen that way. But as time has progressed, what I've learned is that technology can do good and it can do bad at the same time. And back in the early days, it wasn't really thought of or done in ways that were evil or have a bad intent. Right. But I think as we've seen over the years of progress, we've seen technology increasingly used as a good and a weapon. And I think that's what has me a little bit kind of like, what was I doing back then? Was I promoting this in a way that potentially took us down this path of what we're facing now, which is technology can now be used to weaponize against people. And I don't want to take responsibility for helping contribute to the growth of this, but I do worry about that.
Yeah, and I think I agree. Like, social media is positive in lots of ways, but there is, in my view, the dopamine hit of Instagram, that you've got to have your picture that looks, the world is perfect. I do kind of think that although this is true, there's always been that mentality in human beings. I think it's maybe been exaggerated slightly with the way of social media, Instagram and TikTok and all those social media platforms, which are sort of making it easier for people to be able to show this fake life. But you think about it, I don't know, I just think it was interesting. I saw a picture and it was the 1950s versus the 2010s, and it was people standing on a train station. And in the 1950s, everyone had their paper and they were ignored absolutely everyone and was just fixated on reading their paper. Now in 2010s, 2020s, everyone's on their phone. So I do think that sort of portrayal of that perfect life, it might have been 30, 40 years ago, it might have been going out and portraying that your job is fantastic and your life is brilliant and I've got the great girlfriend or the wife, whatever it is. So I actually think technology is only really replicating what human beings did anyway. I just think they're making it easier, and I'd be interested to hear your view on this. I just think technology is making it easier to try and portray that life of that perfect life that everyone has.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that all technology does is reflect our interests and our way of thinking. And I think what we're starting to see is that becoming in full display, right? Yeah. So, if you look at AI technology now, if you fast forward to what we're facing right now, AI is like, it's mirrored after humans, right? But the difference is that it's mirrored across all humans, right? So that's what's different about it. I think up till we've reached this point of thinking about AI technology is that, sure, computers have been we're collecting information from humans, right? So we're all individual computers of sorts, right? So each one of us has independent thought, independent kind of, we're isolated, right? In our own little world, right? Around us. Sure, we interact with others, but there hasn't been, a way to connect all of us together, right? From a information perspective. And I think that's kind of where we're at now, is that the technology has progressed to a point where we can start connecting thoughts and information and things like that collectively amongst all of us, and input into another memory base, or some sort of an intelligent pool of human thought and communication. So if you look at the GPT-4 platform, it's really built on information that was contributed from humans into a collective database, and all it's doing is processing all that information. And I think a lot of us are scared of what that potential could be, of us all losing our independence of thought and our uniqueness, because once it gets thrown into a pot, then is there uniqueness at that point?
There is, but I do kind of think that we started with that people should be the main focus, whether it's business or whether it's life or
Right.
family. I don't think that will necessarily change. I think there's certain constants that will happen when you're dealing with technology, and there's obvious that there are some negatives, but I do think the element of the human, as long as there is still an element of a human impacting that, then we should be fine. But I don't want to doomsday anyone. But go on.
Yeah, I was just going to add one little piece to this too. I think that we have to step back and realize that we are the ones that are creating this, right? Humans are the ones that are creating this artificial intelligence. So we should have the ability to make it what we want it to be, not make something that then, like what some people are saying, is going to kill us, right? If you want to take it to the extreme here, because it's so much more intelligent than we are, but we have to keep in mind, we created this thing. So I think we have to figure out a way. It's not so much control it, but let's just make it something that is beneficial to humans, not destructive to humans. And I think that's the challenge that we have, is that our human tendency is to have an aspect of everything that we do that's kind of weaponized, right? And that's my fear right now around AI, is that there's going to be some people that are going to want to weaponize it.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. Look, let's go into podcasting. I was going to talk to you about your time in marketing and Microsoft, and spending many years at Microsoft, which is fascinating. We might come back to that. But where did the love for podcasting start for you?
I think it really started when I started doing my radio show, because that started in 1999. Podcasting didn't actually officially start till 2004. But I was right there with the early group of podcasters that started making my show available in an RSS feed. It just so happened I was building a new website that was being developed, ironically, by a company out of the Ukraine at the time. And so I had done an exchange with them with my radio show that I would promote them because they were a website developer.
We're just having a quick break from the episode today. Thank you so much for joining me today. What I want you to do is, can you do one thing for me? Can you go and text one of your friends a link to the show, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or any other of the podcast providers, and text a friend of yours that you love this show and they should be listening to it. It's a simple request, and I really would appreciate if all you do is give that text to a friend, family member or colleague. And lastly, if you do want to see more information about the podcast, go to absolutebusinessmindset.com. Right, back to the interview.
Company out of the Ukraine. And so it just so happened that they were rolling out my new website that I had built with RSS, and I had a custom built blog and all that stuff like that, at the same time that podcasting kind of hit its stride back in the summer of 2004. I had already been distributing my radio show as an MP3 download off of all sorts of other types of platforms that were very similar to podcasting for quite a few years beforehand. And one of them was with Microsoft. So I made 25 cents per transfer of an episode between Windows XP and a Pocket PC device through a platform called Sync and Go with Microsoft. I was making like $5,000 a month just transferring my radio show from a Windows XP device to a Pocket PC device.
Right.
So that's kind of how I got involved in all this stuff, and was very heavily involved in precursor platforms. There was other platforms that were taking my streams that I was doing off of Windows Media and Real Streams. They were recording the streams, and then they were making it available as a download later.
Right.
Those type of platforms were going on before podcasting too. So yeah, so kind of getting started with podcasting for me was really kind of a nothing burger, to be quite frank about it. It was a very small part of my distribution at the time, because most of my distribution was on satellite radio, and on broadcast radio at the time was on like 15 broadcast stations and on the XM satellite radio network at that time. And that's where I was getting most of my audience.
That's fascinating. And then you moved into more content roles. And so I'm fast forwarding quite a bit, but we're going to jump back in a minute. So you then started taking on more sort of, if I say corporate roles, so you worked for Libsyn, you worked for Spreaker, you've worked for Podbean. When did you, and I know you did the new media show and you still do the new media show, but when was that transfer from content driven roles into more corporate's not quite the right word, but more into the business side of podcasting?
Well, that actually takes us back to when I started my show, actually, because back when I was doing what I was doing, there were no Libsyns, there were no platforms out there that I could go to say, do this with my show. I had to build it myself. Right. So I had to build servers, literal server boxes, load operating systems, and install them in CDNs. This was back, I started doing that back in like 2001 or so, as the show was scaling. So I started building that out. At one point I had 6 servers and 2 co-location facilities to support my show. And then I increasingly had capacity to take on other shows. So I was really, in the early days, this was like 2001 or so, started hosting other radio shows on my infrastructure that I had built. So I was kind of my own service provider, and I had to admin that for many years before I got out of it. But that's how I kind of got started with it. And then I took on a full-time role at a company called Melodio in Seattle. It's a startup company in Seattle. It was actually a music company that was making music available on mobile phones. This was back in 2005. And I took on a marketing role in downtown Seattle with this company that was later purchased by HP. But it was basically a platform that had decided to move from music to podcasting. So they had built this Java app infrastructure for mobile phones back then, and they wanted to make audio podcasts available on these mobile phones. This was pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone era. Yeah. Right. So that's when I started, really kind of working on the platform side, and did a lot of deals with wireless carriers around the world to build catalogs, podcasting catalogs for individual carriers around the world. Some in Europe, like O2, and in the UK, I built catalogs for them, and then they sold a subscription service into their mobile phones platform that gave access to data as well as a whole content catalog that I had built for them, specifically for O2.
Something that struck me having this conversation with you, Rob, is how technical your knowledge is, which I've never really grasped from speaking to you and spending time with you, that you're actually very techie. You actually have been brought up and sort of developed those skills. When you think of in essence, your own hosting platform for a while at the early days. Have you always had a fascination with technology?
Well, since technology has existed, because I certainly, back when I graduated from college, which was in 1986, technology was just barely lifting off back then. I got my exposure to technology back then was doing statistics for my marketing concentration classes. And that was it. That was like using this, mainframe type of computer to do statistical analysis on survey data. That was really my exposure. And then my father was an accountant, and he started to use these IBM PCs to do his accounting work. So I got exposed to computers, and I grew up in the Bellevue, Seattle area, which is where Microsoft started. So, Bill Gates's first office was right across the street from where I was at in downtown Bellevue back in the early days when he first got started. So I've always had this kind of interest in what was going on with Microsoft and PCs and things like that. So, but training wise, I don't have a degree in computer programming or computer education at all. I'm entirely self-taught,
right,
and just dove into it and struggled through it and did what I could to develop enough skills to get me in trouble sometimes. I mean, I think I've held a job for Podcast One down in Los Angeles as their CTO before. So I've had those type of roles before. It wasn't easy for me to be the CTO of a podcast platform like a Podcast One.
Yeah.
That wasn't an easy role for me, but because I'm really a content marketing guy at the end of the day. But I think that there was a recognition that I had some technical skills that could be applied to, the whole spectrum of what was needed, right, in a particular situation, and that I was willing to throw myself into it and do that kind of work for a period of time. And that's what's also made me a little bit of a Swiss Army knife in the podcasting space too. I've been able to talk about technical issues at the same time, talk about content and distribution issues and stuff. And that's been a strength. And I think here over the last, couple of years, though, there's been really this move towards specialization increasingly. So those that have a lot of skills don't, it's not as favorable of a thing because fewer people have it.
Mm-hmm. What's the role? You said that you've got 2 kids. What's the role of your family in your life and what you do now?
Well, both of my children are fully grown up and they have their own families now with their own children. So, my son lives in Russia and my daughter lives in Phoenix, and they're building their own careers and their own families. So I don't have a lot involvement in that anymore. I've been lucky enough to, be able to be relatively young and be able to live kind of like a post-child life, right? To some degree. I spent a lot of years raising my kids and that kind of stuff. So it's, this is kind of like the last few years have been, freeing of being able to not have all those responsibilities again. So I can venture off and do things. So.
Well, absolutely. And you've done so much as well through your career. Let's bring you to fast forward to present day. Mm-hmm. So you set up a company, you're co-founder of Podcast EZ. What is that and what are you doing now?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of doing 2 things with what I'm doing now. Yeah, I'm a co-founder and kind of advisor to a podcast education and production company called podcastez.com. And I've been involved in that for probably a good year and a half, almost 2 years now. So it's just a matter of that company's been trying to find its way in the market. It's a difficult business to be in, to be a training and consulting and development company for podcasting. So there's a lot of competitors out there right now. But that's really kind of
helping podcasters. What, do the marketing, do the content,
all those things,
production?
Right? Yeah, all those things, right? The company started on the side of actually taking a new podcaster, taking them through the whole process and getting their show launched, doing the post-production, publishing, distribution, all that stuff for them, right? So it was really kind of a full service operation. And now the company is kind of shifting over to being more of an education platform with maybe some light support on the content production side. And
what's the second role? What's the other thing you're doing?
The other thing is a company called Spoken Life Media, which is really a consulting business / content creation company myself, where I'm going to roll up probably around 3 to 4, probably 3 new shows that I'm going to be producing and actually hosting that are going to be under that umbrella. And then also doing a few contracts with some outside companies that need help in ancillary sides of the content creation business, not so much podcast hosting business, which I'm kind of, at this point, I'm kind of moving on from that side of my background, which I've been doing for like the last, I guess, 8.5 years or so. It's on the podcast hosting platform side. So now it's kind of phasing a little bit back, a little bit more closer to how I started in all this,
Right.
on the content side, and helping others, continuing to help podcasters and networks and things like that to develop. But I am increasingly getting pulled into more topics and more potential projects around artificial intelligence as it relates to content creation and podcasting. So that seems to be an area where a lot of people have interest right now, from investors, and actually a lot of the companies in the medium right now are thinking, well, I need to probably embrace this AI thing to some degree to help podcasters kind of streamline their workflows and maybe help content get published much more rapidly than how it's typically done. So those conversations are happening increasingly as well. And my background, being as broad as it is a good place to be to help those companies kind of think through those issues.
So something I'm playing around with at the moment for my own podcast is it Descript? Do you know Descript? So
I do.
What it is, it's to streamline the way you edit your podcast, and it's less to do with sound, it's to do with the transcripts that they've created. And I've been playing around with that with the audio. Is there anything that for you is going to, like, I can see you being a soothsayer here for me. Is there anything for other podcast creators that are listening to this that we should be looking at to whether it's AI or any other technology that will really help the creator side?
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to get a perspective on this just from talking to other companies and trying to understand the technology. I mean, I use it myself and trying to figure out what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are. And so that puts me in a better position to be able to, make recommendations to companies on how to proceed with this. My general contribution on this topic is to proceed with caution. At this point, the technology is good and it's remarkable in a lot of ways, what it's capable of doing. But I think you have to look very closely at what the results are and make sure that the results are consistent with your uniqueness, right? Instead of I think the danger is relying on it too much too early. It is based on old data. It's based on two-year-old data. So you have to keep that in mind, is that it's not going to be up to date.
Well, it's the same with ChatGPT.
Well, it is.
It's like 2 years.
That's actually what I'm talking about.
Everything is 2 years old. And so if you're going to ask information about a current, I don't know, if you're talking about the war in Ukraine or a government's decision 6 months ago, it's not good. It doesn't hold that information. I think that's actually something that people aren't actually aware of and should be aware that, as you say, it's old data that they're holding. It is amazing. It's been super impactful for me with other projects that I've been doing. But you do have to. It is a tread carefully with caution. There almost should be a disclaimer with when you're using it, just to sort of let people know about those things. So, but is there anything else in the AI world? Let's put ChatGPT. It's been talked about a lot, and I find it incredible and very useful. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about? Midjourney was something else that someone shared with me. The pictures that you can create on Midjourney, which is amazing as well. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about or looking into?
Yeah, I think that the power of it probably in the shorter term is more how it can start to streamline repetitive tasks that maybe are considered to many in the podcasting space to be kind of grunt work, not real productive work, right? So if it's cutting and pasting things into forms or something like that, that the computer, and this isn't necessarily artificial intelligence that is driving this, but it feels like that the AI is the engine that will enable this to more easily happen, which is basically creating titles of episodes, creating your show notes. Now, granted, there's companies out there that are already doing this, but the problem is they're independent tools. So, and this is a common thing that I've seen in technology just in general, is that there's usually startup companies that start up that are really building companies around what I call features of another company, right? But haven't been built in yet. So the thinking is that I'm going to create this startup company and I'm going to get acquired and it's going to be built into this other bigger company's platform, right? But in practical terms, that's kind of not how it oftentimes works. Oftentimes what you're doing is you're proving concept for this big company to just build it themselves. Right. So that's the challenge with a lot of the AI companies that I'm seeing out there right now, is that they're taking a piece of a solution. But the bigger solution is looking at it bigger, right? How do we take the process from beginning to end, right? Get to what the podcaster wants, but also start out in a way like you talked about the Descript platform. But that Descript platform is pretty wide ranging in what it's capable of doing. I mean, you can edit audio with the text. You can create audio with the text. You can pull a transcript. They're increasingly getting into editing video. Plus, they also have the ability in the platform to do what's called overdub, which is basically creating a voice clone of any of us and be able to use that voice clone in the editing process to add audio via text.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's not just about deleting audio based on text. You can also potentially add audio based on text. And that's a whole other level. Right.
Yeah, it's a really exciting area. Rob, I'm going to have to get you back on because I need to do my last questions, but there's still half a dozen questions that I didn't get around to asking you. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quickfire questions. They don't need a quickfire answer. They're a little bit thought-provoking. First question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
I think the best decision that I made was getting involved in creating media. That definitely took my career in a completely different way. I've owned restaurants. I've done lots of different things in my background. I used to work in the food business, and I think that probably the biggest decision that I made was walking into a radio station back in 1999, and that was a big risk. So, given what I've told you about my confidence and my ability to speak, that was a big gamble for me. And so what that proves to me is that you have to stretch yourself a little bit if you want to have an exciting life and to do things that are challenging.
Taking risks as well.
Right. And put yourself out there and take some chances. And often, I mean, it doesn't always work out, but in my case, it did.
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Advice is to think about others first as much as possible. It's not always easy to do that, but to create win-win relationships, which is something which is a little bit of a dichotomy to my upbringing as a competitive athlete, which was crush, kill, destroy was kind of the ideology behind that. So I think that's the biggest piece of it. And teamwork is important too. You know, being an individual contributor, I believe is a little bit what I've gravitated towards over the last few years, but I also understand how to work in a team, but sometimes teams don't want to work together too. And I think that's also a big part.
Yeah. Who's helped you most in your career?
I think here, who's helped me most in my career? I would say other content creators, I think, to help me see things differently. Not always thinking that what I think is the right answer to everything. I think it's easy to fall into that trap of realizing that the experience that I have is the most important experience. But I think it's listening and learning from other experiences. And more specifically, it's been content creators.
Tell me about a regret that you have.
I regret not doing as many of my own hosted podcasts over probably the last 8-10 years. I've been a co-host on a show, but that's quite different than having my own show. So, and that's changing right now. I'm in the middle of changing that. Yeah.
Amazing. What are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of, my children, number one. I would say my work in the content creation industry. And I think I think those are the main ones.
Amazing. And what does legacy mean to you?
I don't know. I don't really think too much about that. It's more, I mean, I think it's part of what happens, but I don't know, once you're gone, you don't know what your legacy is at that point. But I think just working hard and making a difference in people's lives will create a legacy for you. No question.
I think often people get very grandiose about legacy, and it's, I want my business to run for 100 years off, but actually impacting people in your life. And they say that it takes 3 generations to be forgotten. So your friends, your family, then your kids, and then your grandkids. But after that, unfortunately, legacy probably doesn't stretch too far,
No, it doesn't.
Unless you're Elon
like
Musk and you're changing.
Yeah, or Michelangelo or Nikola Tesla or somebody like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And lastly, if people want to reach out to you, where can they get you, Rob?
Probably the best place, Twitter, all of the social networks I'm active on. You can send me an email, rob.greenlee@gmail.com. I have a website, robgreenlee.com as well. But yeah, at Rob Greenlee on Twitter is a great place. You can send me a direct message or whatever. But I'm also on LinkedIn too, so you can find me over there.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much for your time. I would love to have you back in a couple of months' time, and we can sort of fill in some of these other gaps. You're inductee on the Podcast Hall of Fame. We could talk about the role of video. There is still so much for us to talk. So hopefully in a few months' time, you would like to come back again.
Yeah. Send an invite. I'd be happy to join you anytime.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rob. It's absolute pleasure speaking to you. You're an inspiration to me in the podcasting world. And I just think you're a great guy. And thank you so much for joining me today.
All right, Mark. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
It's always